England too. Elsewhere, we'll see a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers. And the best of the sunshine towards the southeast, we could see highs around 24 or 25 Celsius. Elsewhere, generally the high teens to low 20s. That area of rain across North Wales, northern England, continues to push further north as we head through the evening, and then further spells of rain push into southern parts of the UK as we move into the early hours. This could be heavy at times, so overnight a lot of cloud around outbreaks of rain, and that will keep temperatures up generally a little higher, 14 to 17 degrees across much of the country. So it means a cloudy, wet start for many Tuesday morning, heavy showers already, but it should brighten up as we move through the morning into the afternoon, but that will trigger a few heavy showers too. Over the next few days, it remains unsettled as that low pressure stays in charge. Further showers.
Welcome to Gloria Meets. First up, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Brandon Lewis.
And one thing I've never spoken about is my daughter got bullied badly at school as well. And one of the things and it was probably more when it happened to her, it sort of reminded me of what happened to me.
We've got the former Labour MP, Luciana Berger.
I'd left the Labour Party because I couldn't sleep at night, and in the wake of the party coming out of special measures, I felt the party was returning to a place that I could call home again.
Conservative MP James Morris.
At the age of about 14, I sort of realised I was sort of suffering from depression.
All that after your news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The BBC has suspended the male presenter accused of paying a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for explicit images. That's after it emerged the young person's mother told The Sun she saw a photo of the man in his underwear on her child's phone. The Director General, Tim Davie, has confirmed the BBC was aware of a complaint in May and has been investigating the case ever since. In a statement, he also condemned the unsubstantiated rumours being made on the internet about some of the corporations presenting talent. More than 1,000 people have crossed the English Channel on small boats over the past 2 days. The Home Office says over 600 people were intercepted on Friday and almost 400 made the journey yesterday. Despite storm warnings, conditions are calm, and GB News understands more than 200 people have already been intercepted this morning. It brings this year's total to 12,700. The Home Office says the number of people risking their lives is unacceptable. Britain's preparing to host the US president, who's due to arrive this evening. Joe Biden earlier boarded Air Force One in Delaware, and he's now on his way to Stansted Airport. Tomorrow he'll meet the King at Windsor Castle before holding talks with the Prime Minister at Downing Street. He's expected to raise concerns about Brexit and America's decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. Well, Biden's visit comes ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, where the Prime Minister will urge allies to bolster their defence spending. Speaking in Vilnius on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak's expected to say we're seeing unprecedented security challenges. The UK remains one of the few NATO members meeting the alliance's requirement to spend at least 2% of national income on defence. More than 700 firearms have been seized in the UK by the National Crime Agency. Forces have been working with police in Spain to stop guns, which can be easily converted, from entering the UK. In 11 cases, firearms were sent to people with mental health issues, and 7 involved people with extremist views. The NCA says 74 people have been arrested, resulting in 50 convictions over the past 5 years. Police say they're investigating a possible hate-related incident in County Tyrone. It's after the Irish flag and a picture of the Premier Leo Varadkar was placed on top of a bonfire. There was also a boat with a banner which read, "Good Friday Agreement, that ship has sailed." The pyre was later set alight. PSNI Chief Inspector John Kears says evidence is now being gathered to establish whether a criminal offence has been committed. Just Stop Oil has denied any involvement in the stunt at the former Chancellor's wedding yesterday. The group posted a video of a woman throwing orange confetti at George Osborne and his wife Thea Rogers, but is now saying it wasn't responsible. Just Stop Oil, however, applauded the move, which generated publicity for its cause. The Chancellor is set to outline so-called evolutionary pension reforms to boost economic growth. Jeremy Hunt plans to make changes to pension funds, encouraging investors to support fast-growing businesses. In a speech tomorrow, he's expected to say the changes will be gradual, not drastic. The government says the aim is to help savers, pension schemes and the UK. Concerns have been raised about the thousands of displaced Ukrainians who are still in temporary accommodation in Scotland. The Liberal Democrats say more than 3,000 Ukrainians are still in hotels and around 700 are on board the MS Victoria cruise ship. The party says progress has been slow and it criticised the lack of resources. The government says it's working on longer-term housing. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's time for Gloria Meets.
Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister Brandon Lewis. Really looking forward to this interview. The first thing I want to say is, You look very slim from the Brandon Lewis that I last saw. What's going on here?
Well, thank you. Yeah, occasionally when you see the stories and they use an old photo, and I've had friends message me a few times, go, "Oh, you should correct that story." I'm like, "No, I want to correct the photo." It's the story you get used to as a politician. Yeah, no, I had one of those moments a couple of years ago when I hit 50 and I had a medical and just thought everything was fine, but it's either now or never. And I've always been big, and I just thought, right, I'm gonna go for it, and so decided to lose some weight.
How much have you lost?
About 4.5 stone from where I was, yeah.
Wow. And you said something interesting there. You've always been big. So is this the first time in your life that you're slim?
Yeah, it's probably the first time in my life, certainly as long as I can remember, that I've been probably around the weight I should be, rather than being, I was always big at school and everything, so it's I'm enjoying it, yeah.
Does it feel good?
Yeah, it does, I feel a lot better, yeah.
Most important thing to cut out, if anybody's watching and wants to lose a pound or two, not 4.5 stone might be a bit much.
For me, it was chocolate. I had a real bad chocolate addiction, and all those starchy junk food things you shouldn't eat. So my joke to myself was always just stop eating the things you like. But I've now got, just eating healthier and doing a bit of training, and but chocolate was my main problem, yeah.
You said that you'd always, as long as you can remember, you've always been big. Last year, you just did a tweet on social media revealing that you were bullied at school for your weight and dyslexia. We're going to talk about both of those in turn. You didn't go into any details on the tweet. What was the nature of the bullying you were subjected to?
It varied when I was at school, actually. I mean, mainly just being fat. You got comments and a bit of abuse being fat. Also, when I was at school, my dad had quite a successful business, and he sold his business. That got attention, I guess, looking back, jealousy kind of thing. But yeah, it was mainly over being fat. I was bullied.
What was so you were name called, basically?
Yeah, and you get used to being the last one picked for a team or whatever, because obviously you weren't fit enough to go running. No, but it was, I mean, what the weird thing for me was, I've always said, at the time I didn't particularly register that it was having an impact. I mean, I knew I was being bullied, and it's never nice. But I also had some good friends at school as well, so I wasn't somebody who didn't have friends. But what it did do was it kind of changed my approach to things. So you become a bit hardened. What people say about you, if you know it's not true, starts to not impact, which is quite useful as a politician. If you can go to bed at night confident that you've done the right thing for the right reason, then actually somebody name calling in whatever format, you harden up to that. So in that sense, I always took the view it probably was not unhelpful, and I've tried to see it in that sort of positive way.
Did it impact you as a child? You were a teenager when it was most prevalent, is that right? Did it impact on your mental health as a child? Do you remember?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard sort of looking back. At the time, I don't remember being particularly conscious of that. It probably gives you that almost for part of your life, I suppose. You question everything in terms of almost the imposter syndrome kind of thing. But I just found it made me just work a bit harder. I wanted to succeed, so you become a bit more focused, a bit more determined, a bit more driven. Don't give up on things just because somebody has a different view to you. That's how life goes. So in a sense, as I say, I've always tried to think of it in a positive sense. That it just made me it gave me a bit of thicker skin and stronger skin, which has hopefully stood me in some stead.
How did it stop? Or did you just leave school and?
I left school. I mean, it always continued. But yeah, you just get a bit older and it becomes water off a duck's back. So.
Is there bullying in politics?
Look, I've never been subject to it or seen it in politics. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and obviously there's been some stories over the last year or so. My experience has always been, I remember a very old friend of my dad's always said, treat others how you wish to be treated, and particularly on your way up, because you're going to meet people when you're on your way down, and we all go up, we all have periods where we go down. So I've tried to always work with people in the format that I'd like them to work with me, and try and work on making sure that you're building a team in a positive way, because one of the things I learned in government early from people I'd worked with was whether you're a civil servant, special advisor, a junior minister, a senior minister, you only deliver if you work together as a team. So I've always tried to try and have that approach.
I just wonder if you with your own experience, if you can see particular character traits in bullies, is there something about some people that make them engage in this horrible behaviour?
Yeah, and one thing I've never spoken about is my daughter got bullied badly at school as well. And one of the things and it was probably more when it happened to her, it sort of reminded me of what happened to me. And I think actually there's an element of jealousy. People sort of, whether it's real or imagined, but they're jealous of what they perceive to be somebody else's life or experience. And those people themselves having maybe an inferiority complex, and their way of dealing with it is to actually go and victimise others. So I think when you see bullying, generally the weakness is in the bully. And once you can get your mind straight about that, somebody said to me a long time ago, the only person who has control over how you feel ultimately is you. Once you recognise that, then whether it's a bully or anything else, it's their problem, not yours.
And if any parents are watching and they fear that their children have been bullied at school, any words of advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's the hardest thing to deal with. Much worse than if you're being bullied yourself, because it's your kids and you want to do anything for them. My wife was brilliant and dealt with most of the situation we went through. And I would say you've got to just be there and give support to your kids. It's really hard now. I mean, when I was at school, the advantage I had was if I was bullied during the day, and it was generally verbal stuff. Yeah. It was never, because I was big, nobody physically ever tried anything. But you got to go home, and at 4 o'clock you left school, you went home and you're in a safe environment. Of course, today, when you leave school with social and digital media, it continues, arguably it gets worse. And I think being on top of that and being supportive around that is really key. The kids knowing that you as a family are a safe place is probably the best thing you can do. And don't be afraid of dealing with it, particularly if it's at school. I think some schools still really struggle with how to deal with it. My experience, both with myself and my daughter, was not good. Schools just didn't know how to deal with it. So the family has to step up and play that role and be there for the kids.
You also revealed that you're dyslexic.
Yes.
When was your condition recognised?
It wasn't recognised actually until I was at university.
Really? You went to a fee-paying school and
never got picked up.
Nothing.
So the reason I went to a fee-paying school is when I was very young. I was about 11 or something like that. I was in a state school, and the teachers, because I wasn't doing very well, made me. I had one of those experiences where they sat your desk in front of right on the blackboard, so my nose was kind of touching. There was a blackboard back there. Because if you can't read the blackboard, then we'll stick you that close. And it was that kind of thing. And my parents took the decision to take me out of that school and put me into a fee-paying school. But it was I'd always been very bad at spelling. Spelling was my real issue. And it was when I was at university, a friend who was in education was chatting to my wife, and she was saying that spelling's still bad. I've got a kind of eidetic memory, so I did quite well at law, so I could memorise the cases. She just said, I think you might have been dyslexic. So out of curiosity, I then went and did a test. And the test showed I was dyslexic. And what they said to me was, if we'd have tested you at 10, 11, 12, you'd have probably been quite severe. And what I had developed for myself, the methodology of how I dealt with it was what they teach. So effectively mind mapping, blocking for numbers. So my brain, and apparently people who do go into further education, the brain finds ways around these things. Which is what I turned out I'd done. But yeah, I'd been dyslexic. So I'd had a bit of a not bullying, but comments at school from teachers often, and it turns out it was actually dyslexic. I couldn't spell and struggled with that kind of thing.
Gosh.
So,
and that must have felt like being bullying in a different way.
A little bit. But spell check's been a godsend for people like me. So predictive text is a threat, but spell check is, yeah.
Has it affected your working life, being dyslexic?
I don't think so. I mean, I ended up, I'm told it's probably through the dyslexia I sort of developed a sort of semi-photographic memory, which probably helped. Yeah. Particularly when you're doing speeches and trying to remember figures at the dispatch box, things like that. But no, I think your brain just finds ways to work around some of these challenges. So, and again, I suppose, in a way, dealing with something like that, finding ways around it gives you that determination to get on and get things done. It probably drove my desire to go to, I went to work from school, then I went back to university. And I think it was probably because at school I was never seen as very bright, probably because of the dyslexia, that when I went to university, I was then determined to do it. And I did a degree and did a master's, and when I qualified as a barrister, it was probably partly to prove that I can do this. Just
to close on, just a couple of reflections, thoughts, because you came in in 2010. You were a minister very soon afterwards, a couple of years afterwards. You spent the last 5 years in the cabinet. So top table for most of your political career. You're on the back benches. How is it?
Having control of my diary for the first time in 10 years is very, very enjoyable, I have to say. After lots of cancelled nights out with my wife and cancelled family holidays, actually being able to plan and do things is quite nice. But look, I was very fortunate. I had 10 years, really interesting jobs all the way through, very much enjoyed everything I did. And a phenomenal experience and a chance in various jobs to do things that hopefully make a difference. Obviously, you want to think you made a positive difference and deliver things. I've always focused on making sure in every department you get something done and delivered that you can look back on. So now I'm very pleased and proud of what I've done and quite enjoying life at the moment.
Good. And one of the things that I want people to understand is it's not just about running the department. You're round the top table. You're sat there with the Prime Minister. You can make your voice heard and give your advice. If you were back round that top table, there was one thing that you could say, we should focus on this more. Is there anything?
Obviously, it's very dangerous to suck. And when you're not at the table, you're not, part of what they're doing.
You don't have to go there. I'm tempting you.
But what I will say is one of the things I think it takes a bit of time to remember and to learn, actually. One of the benefits of having a long time as a junior minister, middle ranking, before becoming to the top table, is even when you're at the table, is remembering that, yes, you've got your area and you become very laser focused on that, to almost exclusion of everything else, to really focus on it. But actually, when you're at the table for your wider views, and actually not to be afraid on an area that's outside of your department to have an input if you feel you've got a relevant input. I think that's one of the main things to remember is you are part of that team and therefore you have a right and actually a role to contribute to the wider discussion. And look, at the moment, my general comment is we've got to be focused on making sure we're delivering for people. And as a government, that we are doing things where the public can see the government is focused on it, it's empathetic to it, and it's going to get things done. Because I think the public want to see their government, whatever colour the government happens to be, is focused on the issues they care about and has got ideas to deal with those issues.
Brandon Lewis, you haven't really done a sit-down since you've left
no, I haven't,
the Cabinet. I'm really thankful that you decided to do it with us at GBNews, and I loved our chat. I really did.
No, it's been a pleasure. Good to see you. Thank you.
Coming up, Luciana Berger.
I think there's been a number of recommendations for people leaving Parliament to ensure that if they need security to continue, that is made available. That because you're no longer elected doesn't necessarily mean the threat doesn't remain.
Coming up, James Morris.
But I'm now, the idea that I'm cured. I don't think we get cured. We learn how to live with it.
Luciana Berger. Normally when we talk about politicians' life and times, when we talk to them, they're normally a lot older than you. You're just 42. You were elected as a Labour MP in 2010. You served until the last general election. In February 2019, you left the Labour Party.
I did.
Just remind us why.
It wasn't ever a decision I anticipated having to even contemplate, yet, let alone make that decision. But I left the Labour Party because it no longer represented the values that had led me to join it in the first place. So when I was a wide-eyed, aspirational student, very idealistic, what drew me to the Labour Party, it was what was very much integral part of the membership card. It was values around equality for all and anti-racism against all. And I spent a disproportionate amount of my time towards the end of my period in Parliament tackling with issues around anti-Jewish racism within the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. For me, that took its toll. It became too much. I was the parliamentary chair of the Jewish Labour movement at the time, and I just didn't feel comfortable remaining within the party at that moment.
You're now back.
I am.
You came back in February of this year.
Yes.
Why?
There was a really significant moment that happened earlier this year. So in the wake of the last leadership in that period, under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, in the weeks and months that followed, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission announced that they were investigating the Labour Party, and there's a pretty damaging findings. It was the Labour Party under that leadership was found to have intimidated and harassed its Jewish members. There was political interference that had come from the top, and the Labour Party was put into special measures. This is normally a mechanism reserved for, organisations that do really bad things. So it was, pretty traumatic, I think, to the party to have been put in that place. People said, that I must have had some sort of satisfaction that those findings were brought forward, but no, not at all. Early this year, after a number of special measures and requirements that the Labour Party had to carry out, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission took the party out of special measures. It was determined that under the leadership of Sir Keir Starmer that many things had been done to turn the party around, to root out that racism, to show leadership and to really tackle some of those challenges within. And so for me, that was a really important moment. I'd left the Labour Party because I couldn't sleep at night, and in the wake of the party coming out of special measures, I felt the party was returning to a place that I could call home again.
6 people have been convicted for anti-Semitic abuse against you since 2013. 4 of those have been to prison. It's hard to actually read out those numbers, but you went through that. Did you ever fear for your life?
There were some pretty dark moments. When you say it like that, it sounds pretty stark, and people might have seen 1 or 2 of the stories. Some, there was a lot of press coverage, others were more concealed. There were moments when I was subject to thousands of racist and abusive messages that were prompted as a result of people being convicted and sent to prison. So it wasn't just those individuals that were held to account, it's the actions that followed by others as well. We live in a country where we can hold people to account. So I took some comfort from the fact that when people threatened my life and or directed that racist abuse towards me, that they could be held to account. And I would always and would continue to use the full force of the law to try and hold those people to account where they can be identified. But yes, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some times where it's pretty tricky. I chose to go into public life. My experience is pretty unique. It's not. I think it's important for people to know that it's a matter of a number of different circumstances, which meant that I got more than my fair share, shall we say. But certainly. What gave me some comfort and strength was the fact that people were convicted as a result of it. And some people, as you say, 4 of them served prison sentences.
There were times during your period as a Labour MP, because of the abuse that you were subjected to, that the police recommended that you needed security. It was a very dark moment when I saw you at Labour Party conference when I was a Labour MP and you were there with police security. I think everybody would feel ashamed that was necessary. So you have the security when you're an MP. The day after the election, which you weren't re-elected, or you weren't elected, there is no security anymore. What's it like to have security and then the day after it's gone?
Well, I know it's certainly something that Parliament is looking at. There was an inquiry that was conducted quite recently in Parliament. Sir Charles Walker was the chair of, and I think there's been a number of recommendations for people leaving Parliament to ensure that if they need security to continue, that is made available. That because you're no longer elected doesn't necessarily mean the threat doesn't remain. And so I think a lot of lessons have been learned in the wake of my experience. And it wasn't just affecting me; it affected others as well. But it's unusual where people, you're told that you face a threat, and then we don't assess the threat because you're no longer an MP. Well, yeah, but does the threat no longer remain? And if people can't answer that question, then I think it's problematic for anyone that finds himself in public office and then is no longer elected.
So and we've talked to Charles Walker about this in a previous programme actually, but basically you're saying if there is an objective threat where some MPs who are no longer MPs are subject to, then the police should do an assessment.
Absolutely. I think that just because you're no longer have the MP after your name, you're still very much in the public eye. And I hope that there wasn't a threat, but the fact that they even evaluated, or that they certainly didn't, in the wake of the 2019 election was challenging for myself and others as well.
More from Luciana Berger after the break.
And I knew that I had to make that decision to leave because I couldn't allow that to impact on my unborn child.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, further showers and longer spells of rain over the next few days. There will be some sunshine though, but for many of us it will feel fresher. And the reason for this is this area of low pressure. It's been around over the last few days, just sat to the west of us, but over the coming few days it actually spreads towards us and increases the risk of showers and longer spells of rain even more. This evening we do have thundery showers across the UK, but they will start to fade away, and then most places overnight we'll see clear skies, though towards the early hours we could see some showers moving back into southwestern parts of the UK. Temperatures generally the low to mid-teens, so a little fresher than recent nights, but still quite warm for the time of year. Monday morning gets off to a dry start for many, plenty of sunny spells, though the cloud quickly thickens from the southwest. This area of rain pushes northeastwards through the day, turning heavy at times, particularly across Wales into the Midlands, northwest England too. Elsewhere we'll see a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, and the best of the sunshine towards the southeast. We could see highs around 24 or 25 Celsius. Elsewhere generally the high teens to low 20s. That area of rain across North Wales, northern England, continues to push further north as we head through the evening, and then further spells of rain push into southern parts of the UK as we move into the early hours. This could be heavy at times, so overnight a lot of cloud around, outbreaks of rain, and that will keep temperatures up generally a little higher, 14 to 17 degrees across much of the country. So it means a cloudy, wet start for many Tuesday morning, heavy showers already, but it should brighten up as we move through the morning into the afternoon, but that will trigger a few heavy showers too. Over the next few days it remains unsettled as that low pressure stays in charge, further showers and longer spells of rain and temperatures around average.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
A GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
You sat in the shadow cabinet for a time. You were a shadow mental health minister, position in the shadow cabinet. Did your own mental health suffer by what you endured during your years as a Member of Parliament?
Certain moments, yes, absolutely. And I'd be lying if I said that it didn't. 2018 was probably the toughest year. Trying to tackle those issues of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish racism within the Labour Party took up so much energy and time. And I was pregnant as well. And it was personally very, very distressing. So that was in particular a tricky year. I count myself really fortunate, really fortunate that I happen to have a high level of resilience. I certainly don't take that resilience for granted. I'm very conscious of the fragility of all of our mental health, and at any moment that resilience can be chipped away. And sometimes it's just the last straw that can break the camel's back. So I count myself really lucky that I've come out the other side, and maybe a future moment it will have an impact. But I was very fortunate to have a fantastic team around me, great family and friends, and I appreciate for many people they don't have that. And certainly when I was involved in some court cases where other people had been victims as well, and I'd heard their victim impact statements, I was very struck by the impact that the racism and abuse had on other people and the toll that it had taken to, which meant that they weren't able to continue in their daily working lives, or they weren't able to maintain relationships with their family and friends. So I've certainly never taken it for granted. And there was a phrase you used earlier in the interview where you said you couldn't sleep at night and stay in the Labour Party. Was that a figure of speech, or you actually couldn't? I literally couldn't sleep. I felt sick. I had like a permanent pain in my chest, really, tightness, and sort of physical manifestations of the stress that you were under. Indeed, and I was pregnant at the time in that last year, and I was also aware, having had the proactive conversation with some health professionals about the impact of stress on pregnancy, and I knew that I had to make that decision to leave because I couldn't allow that to impact on my unborn child. You have a full-time job now, and you also, in addition to that, you're chair of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. Your patron is the Princess of Wales. Must be pretty fascinating to have her as your patron. What are you both trying to achieve? What's the organisation trying to achieve? The Maternal Mental Health Alliance is an extraordinary and fantastic organisation that is such a privilege for me to be the chair of. It's the body that brings together any organisation that provides services, support, care, charity, campaigning to both expectant and new mums. Mental health affects us all, but particularly in the period of pregnancy and the year after birth as women. And there are some conditions that we are more likely to experience during that period. Also, as women, it's the time in our lives where we are 30 to 40 times more likely to experience a period of psychosis. That doesn't discriminate, it can affect everyone. The Alliance is really important to share best practice about how best to provide those services across the UK. The Alliance has campaigned to open mother and baby units across all four corners of the United Kingdom to ensure that babies are kept together with their mums during that time if mums need inpatient mental health support. And we go from strength to strength as an alliance to not only do great stuff here, but also to showcase it to the world, where it's been the example to other places to set up their own alliances as well, to both campaign and to share best practice.
So you have a very full-on life. You're now a single parent too. How is that? Lots of people are single parents.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think we all just contend with the challenges that we face, and there's many people that are full-time single working parents and doing their best. My kids are pretty small. My youngest is going to be starting primary school, but it's always that challenge of when you're at work, you're expected to be a parent. When you're a parent, you're expected not to be working, and just trying to make that all work, but doing my best.
Final question, happy question. You're doing a bit of stand-up comedy.
I am.
So my name's Luciana Berger, and I'm a recovering politician. Yeah.
Can I take you back to when I first met you? We were new MPs, and I remember distinctly, we were on the House of Commons terrace. I think we were having our first drink together. And you said to me, I'm not funny. I don't know where this came from, but I remember you saying it. Now you're doing a bit of stand-up.
Yeah. Turns out I am funny. Who knew? My team that I had, they always talk about these. I did all these impressions. My dad always did impressions and continues to do impressions. He does like 300 different voices. So I grew up around that. And yes, I'd always fancied doing something. And last year I had just a week of time. So I ended up doing full-time, intensive stand-up course, fantastic, in London at a place called the Bill Murray Comedy Club with a fantastic teacher called Dec Munro, one of the best weeks of my life. Yeah, and I've been doing some stand-up since then.
Brilliant. Brilliant to chat to you, Luciana Berger. Thank you.
Thanks, Florian.
Coming up, Conservative MP James Morris.
I wrote a parliamentary report to Her Majesty every day that Parliament was sitting, giving her the perspective on what was happening. And the sort of instruction that you have is that she rather liked a bit of anecdote and a bit of gossip. So it wasn't just all, we had this debate.
James Morris, Conservative MP, elected in 2010. Really, since you got elected, you've been a passionate campaigner for mental health.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, at the age of about 14, I sort of realised I was sort of suffering from depression. At the age of 14, the world seemed a bit bleak, and I didn't really know how to name it, because in the 80s at school, in society, you didn't really have a language with which to speak about this. So it was quite an isolating experience. I thought it was me. But as I got older and started to talk to more people, I realised actually it was pretty common. But what it drove me to want to do when I got into Parliament was to improve mental health care for everybody. So that's why I put myself forward to be the chair of the all-party group for mental health and to campaign on mental health, because it was something that I think we needed to address, and it was something that was very personal to me. So I had I had lived experience, if you like, which I think is really important for politicians, to really understand the issues which they're grappling with. So it's not some kind of policy abstraction, and that there's some real energy in the campaigning, because as you will know, mental health hadn't really been properly addressed by governments of all parties for a long time. The issues to do with parity of esteem within the health service, talking about it, and politicians and people in leadership positions talking about it. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, over the last 13, 15, maybe 20 years, more people in leadership positions in society, like me, like other politicians, have spoken about it, which has given confidence to other people. So that kind of stigma issue, which we'd suffered from for quite a long time, I'm not saying it's gone away, it's definitely not gone away, but it's much better than it was. So the whole debate and people feeling more comfortable about, especially young people, the contrast between my experience back in the 80s and now, even with my son and with my family, where because of the fact that I had depressive episodes, I've been able to speak to him about mental health in a way which means that it's nothing to be embarrassed about, it's nothing to be concerned about. In fact, you can use it as a way of building resilience and capacity in your life to do really interesting things, and it doesn't hold you back.
So you've had a number of depressive episodes.
Yeah.
Could you describe how long do they last? How do you know you're entering one?
Well, it's a kind of, yeah, it's an odd one, because I think it's a combination of brain chemistry. That, you know, there's something that I possibly inherited, which means that I do have these kind of episodic periods, and that I've learned to deal with it over time. I mean, I've spent time in psychotherapy. I'm a big believer in talking therapy as a way of dealing with this. So, you know, I took the positive decision to address it, and that was over a relatively long period of time. But I'm now, you know, the idea that I'm cured. I don't think we get cured. We learn how to live with it. We learn how to use it creatively in our professional and personal lives. I mean, I'm not a big follower of Sigmund Freud, but he said that the point of psychoanalysis and therapy was to allow people to love and work. And I think that is, you know, what it's about. We don't have some sort of magical moment, because all human beings have existential questions. I mean, it's a very, very common thing. And so I think it's partly to do with brain chemistry, possibly, you know, and other factors. But I'm a big believer in talking therapy, although I know that, you know, people do benefit from taking medication for certain things. I happen to believe that talking therapy is a good thing. So that's why I have spent a lot of time, again, in my parliamentary career, campaigning for improved access to talking therapies within the NHS. We've had this thing called improving access to psychological therapies in the NHS, I think dating back to 2008. And one of the things that I've wanted to see is to get a greater range of therapeutic interventions available on the NHS so people have a choice. The dominant mode of IAPT is cognitive behavioural therapy, which is, you know, I think good for certain things. It's got quite a good track record of being able to help people, but it's a short therapy. And I'd like to see other forms of psychotherapy available on the NHS. That's been one of my kind of campaigning themes, if you like, over the last 13 years.
For family members who, or friends even, whose loved ones suffer with depression. Do you have any words of advice about what works for you, how your loved ones should deal with you when you're having an episode?
Well, I think talking about it is a great thing, and maybe I think therapy, broadly speaking, is a good thing, as in it enables you to go and talk about the issues that you have, but being open about it in the family environment. I was saying, with my family, because of my background, I think if my son and my daughter were sitting here, they'd say that we have very open discussions about mental health. I think that's absolutely critical. But actually, in terms of dealing with it, I mean, for example, I don't know whether you know, but I'm quite a sporty person, and I've run the London Marathon twice for charity. I've run half marathons. So running and actually being active is something which I think is actually really important. It's really underestimated, because actually if you focus on something like running, I think it does have a real benefit on your mental health and your overall fitness and resilience level. And so I would kind of advocate people being active, talking about it, being active, and developing strategies for coping.
Politics in your party, actually in the country, really, they've been turbulent for a number of years, most recently in your party. When that turbulence is occurring, does it have an impact on one's mental health?
Well, I think it does. I mean, I'm a pretty tough person now. The fact that I've had depressive episodes, I've learned how to deal with it in my professional life. I mean, I've had a full career in business and in politics. So I've got a thick skin like any other politician, but I think it does impact. I mean, I was in the government whip's office for 3.5 years. And as part of what we do in the whip's office, obviously a lot of it is to do with welfare of colleagues. Yeah. And I was very conscious particularly during some of the more difficult periods of time where colleagues were under a lot of pressure and they were struggling to kind of make sense of the world. Yeah. And I think there is a lot of it about, not just on the government side, but across Parliament.
I agree.
I think it's an underestimated phenomenon, because we have lived through incredibly turbulent times. Yeah. It's been an extraordinary period in political history, and with the pandemic coming along as well, and which has put immense pressure on political representatives to stand up for their constituents and deal with constituency matters in a very, very intensive way.
So you mentioned that you were a government whip.
Yes.
Let's talk about one of the weird and wonderful traditions that we have in this country. So in 2022, the state opening of Parliament, this is when the government introduces its new legislative programme. Mm-hmm. The tradition is that a government whip, senior government whip, is held hostage at Buckingham Palace.
Yes.
What, you were that person. What on earth happens behind closed doors?
Well, it's a very bizarre thing. Not something I ever thought I would do. But so I was what was called the Vice Chamberlain of the Royal Household, because of the historic connection between the Whip's office and the Royal Household. Therefore, it was me. So I have to be taken to the palace. So I was driven to the palace. Actually, when I did it,
in a car, normal car,
in a government car, I felt a little bit like the President of the United States, actually, because I was the only person on the road going to Buckingham Palace. Prince Charles actually did that speech, if you remember, because the Queen was unwell.
Yes.
So I arrive at the palace to be greeted by the Lord Chamberlain. So the Lord Chamberlain meets me and gives me a tour of the crown jewels, because parts of the crown jewels are taken to the Lords. And then I'm taken for a quick tour of the palace, and we sit down. I sit down with the Lord Chamberlain and with some senior equerries from the palace, and we actually watch Prince Charles do the speech from inside the palace. And when they were taking the crown jewels out, I stood with the Lord Chamberlain, nodded the crown jewels out, and when they came back, I nodded them back in again. So it was an it was an extraordinary experience in many ways. But it's one of those kind of traditions where it goes back to Charles I and so on. So, yeah, it was surreal. I mean, I never expected to do any of that ceremonial stuff in my time in Parliament. I had to, as part of that role, I also had to write a daily message to the Queen. I was her 45th Vice Chamberlain, so I wrote a parliamentary report to Her Majesty every day that Parliament was sitting, giving her the perspective on what was happening. And the sort of instruction that you have is that she rather liked a bit of anecdote and a bit of gossip. So it wasn't just all, we had this debate. Yeah. And she did really read it. Wow. She read it before dinner every night, and she used it as an aide memoir when she sat down with the Prime Minister without officials every week.
I did not know that. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Final question. Before you became an MP, you had proper jobs. You ran businesses. There must have been tough moments throughout that time.
Yeah, I mean, I started my career, I was an entrepreneur. So I was involved in several startup companies. I started my career in magazine publishing. And then in the mid-90s, I actually started an internet software company in 1995. Feels a bit like the medieval days of the internet. And it was a time of, great innovation. We had 30 software developers sitting in a warehouse developing new bits of internet-related software. But at the end of the 90s, if you remember the first dot-com crash, we had a contract problem which led to the company going bankrupt and a cash flow problem. And I had to make people redundant, which was a very sobering experience. But again, I mean, I know it's a common thing when people say, in a way, some of your most successful moments of when you fail and you learn from failure. What you realize in those moments is who you really are, whether you've got the resilience and the toughness to deal with those situations, whether you've got empathy for people. And so I learned a huge amount from that experience, actually, because then subsequently we launched a business out of the first one, which was successful. I then went into politics, and in the last 13 years, I won a marginal seat, defended a marginal seat. I've been in 4 elections. I've been in the government or on the backbenches under 5 prime ministers in the last 13 years. So what I learned from that business experience was that you can learn from failure, that it doesn't mean life is it's all over. You can rebuild, and actually it makes you a much stronger person.
That's really good advice about how to deal with failure. Thank you for that, but thank you more importantly for being open about your mental health, for talking about why it is important to talk. It's going to help people. James Morris, Conservative MP, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Join me again next Sunday at 6.